I'm Emily Carter, 27, and on Christmas morning I sat in my parents' living room while my brother unwrapped the keys to a brand new house. The room filled with cheers, plans for parties, and pride that seemed to shine only on him. When it was my turn, my father tossed me a dusty envelope with the deed to a forgotten cabin deep in the woods. Laughter followed, sharp and casual, as if my failure was the best gift they could imagine giving me. I didn't argue. I didn't even smile. I drove to the cabin days later, expecting nothing more than broken boards and silence. Instead, I found a locked box buried beneath the floor, filled with legal files my grandfather had hidden, proof that the land under that crumbling cabin sat on oil worth millions. A week after they mocked me, I placed those papers on the table in front of them. Their laughter died. Their pride evaporated. And for the first time in my life, the silence belonged to them, not me. What followed wasn't just a shift in fortune. It was the unraveling of every family bond, every secret, every assumption they'd built their lives on. Because the daughter they dismissed was the one holding everything they wanted. And none of us would ever be the same again. The snow outside our parents' house was falling in quiet sheets, smoothing the roads, covering the yard in a perfect white blanket. Inside, the living room glowed with string lights wrapped around the tree, the kind of picture-perfect holiday scene that could be printed on a postcard. My mother was perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes darting between the boxes stacked beneath the tree, waiting for the moment she could direct the spotlight where she wanted it. My father stood near the mantel, arms crossed, a faint smirk already sitting on his lips, as if he had been rehearsing this moment for months. My brother sat in the middle of the room, leaning back like he owned it already. He had always carried himself like that, the golden child who never doubted the next reward was his. His girlfriend clung to his arm, laughing at every remark he made, already imagining herself as part of the family's next big chapter. I sat off to the side, a cup of cocoa cooling in my hands, watching them as if I were a guest at my own holiday. When my father cleared his throat, the room stilled. He stepped forward, holding a small, square box. My mother's eyes shone like she was about to witness the unveiling of a miracle. My brother tore into the wrapping with a practiced grin, pulled the lid away, and revealed a set of shining keys resting inside. Gasps filled the room, the kind of exaggerated gasps people make when they already know the surprise but want to act delighted anyway. "It's yours," my father said proudly. "A brand new house. Just finished. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. It's time you had a place of your own." Cheers rose up. My brother stood, lifted the keys high, and grinned like a man stepping into a throne room. Everyone clapped, some even hugged him, as if the house were a prize we had all been competing for, and he had been declared the winner. My mother leaned into his shoulder and whispered something only he could hear, her face glowing with pride. Then my father turned to me. "And for you." He picked up an envelope that looked like it had been collecting dust for decades. He didn't hand it to me with ceremony. He tossed it across the space like it was a bill he didn't want to carry anymore. It landed in my lap with no applause, no smile, no explanation. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded deed, the paper brittle, the ink faded. My name scrawled across the bottom, a signature that felt more like a dismissal than a gift. "It's an old cabin," my father said with a short laugh. "Out in the woods. Been sitting there for years. Nobody's wanted it." The room erupted into laughter, not cruel in tone, but cruel in the way it was so casual, so easy for them to make me the punchline. My brother chuckled, shaking his head. "Perfect fit," he said. His girlfriend giggled beside him, covering her mouth like she knew she shouldn't laugh but couldn't resist. I didn't say a word. I folded the deed carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it on my lap as if it were nothing. On the outside, I kept my face still. On the inside, I felt the kind of silence that sharpens into something heavier than anger. The rest of the morning blurred by laughter around my brother, conversations about decorating his new place, plans for future parties. Not one person asked me about the cabin. Not one person wondered what it was like, what condition it might be in, or whether I wanted it. I was invisible in my own family celebration, left holding a deed to a forgotten place nobody valued. That night, when I left my parents' house, the cold air bit my skin sharper than usual. I held the envelope tighter in my coat pocket, the paper crisp against my palm. My brother waved from the porch, with his new keys dangling between his fingers, the sound of them clinking together like a victory bell. I didn't wave back. The drive to the cabin 2 days later was long, winding, and covered in snow. The road narrowed the deeper I went, the kind of isolation that stretched into miles of silence. My phone lost service halfway, leaving me with nothing but the crunch of tires over ice and the occasional crow cutting across the white sky. When I arrived, the cabin stood like it had been waiting for me. It was old, yes, but not abandoned. The roof sagged at one corner, the paint peeled in thin strips, and the porch creaked when I stepped on it. But there was something about the way it sat in the clearing, surrounded by thick pines, the air sharp and still, that didn't feel worthless. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. The fireplace was blackened but intact. A few old chairs sat draped in sheets, the wood floor scuffed from years of wear. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Unlike the polished house given to my brother, this place held secrets. I could feel it. On the third day, I began cleaning. I pulled apart loose boards, checked the crawl space, swept through corners. That's when I found the box buried beneath the floor in the back bedroom. The wood was damp and heavy, the lid nailed shut. I pried it open with a rusted tool I found near the shed. Inside were papers, folders, documents stamped with signatures and seals, old legal files, yellowed but legible. I spread them across the table, one by one, my breath catching as the words came into focus. Land surveys, contracts, mineral rights, oil leases, not expired, but valid, active, binding. The cabin didn't just sit on an empty patch of forgotten land. It sat on acres mapped out decades ago, acres rich with oil beneath the surface. My late grandfather's name was on the signatures, the man whose stern silence had always left me guessing where his thoughts lay. He had buried this here, hidden it from the rest of them, and for reasons I couldn't yet piece together, he left it tied to me. The numbers were staggering. The royalties, the percentages, the sheer value of what lay beneath this frozen soil. More than my brother's shiny new house could ever dream of being worth. More than anything my parents had ever owned. I sat back in the chair, the papers spread before me like a crown laid out for coronation. For the first time, the silence inside me shifted. It wasn't just heavy anymore. It was sharp, deliberate, a silence that carried weight. On the 7th day, I returned to the city. I carried the documents in a folder, tucked under my arm, not hidden, not flaunted, just there. My parents' house was filled again, this time with talk of furniture shopping for my brother's new home. He stood at the center, retelling the story of receiving his gift, as if he were a prince recalling his coronation. When I stepped inside, the room barely noticed me. I walked to the table, set the folder down, and slid it open. "What's that?" my brother asked, half distracted, until he leaned closer. His laughter stopped. His girlfriend's smile faltered. My mother's face tightened, her eyes skimming over the seals, the signatures, the numbers that screamed more than words ever could. My father stepped forward, his expression shifting from dismissal to disbelief. "This," I said simply, "is what came with the cabin." The room froze. Nobody laughed this time. The air thickened, the glow from the Christmas lights dimmed against the weight of the silence. The folder stayed on the dining table, its contents spread like shards of glass no one wanted to touch. My brother stood frozen, the keys to his house dangling uselessly at his side. My parents didn't speak, but their silence was louder than any argument. I leaned against the chair, letting them absorb it. I didn't need to explain the numbers or the signatures. They were clear. My mother finally broke the silence. "Where did you find this?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a storm she didn't want to show. "In the cabin," I replied. "Under the floorboards. Grandfather left it there." Her jaw tightened. My father shifted, glancing between me and the papers. My brother reached for one of the documents, but I slid it back toward myself before he could touch it. "That land is yours?" my father asked. The disbelief in his tone was almost comical, as if ownership were impossible to imagine in my hands. "It is," I said calmly. "It's written here." It was signed, sealed, and recorded. Grandfather tied it directly to me. The room stilled again. My brother's face reddened, his lips pressing together as if he might explode, but didn't know what words would be strong enough. His girlfriend glanced between us, sensing the shift in power, but too cautious to speak. My father cleared his throat. "Do you understand what this means?" "Yes," I said, sliding the folder shut. "I understand exactly what it means." That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed their expressions over and over. My brother's forced grin fading into nothing, my mother's calculating stare, my father's hesitation. They hadn't celebrated with me. They hadn't congratulated me. They had stood in silence, struck by the realization that the daughter they dismissed now held something they couldn't control. The following morning, I drove back to the cabin. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the porch, the air sharper than the day before. I carried the folder inside and placed it back on the table, laying out the documents again. This wasn't just land. It was leverage. And I knew my family well enough to predict what came next: denial, manipulation, attempts to pull me into their plans. I spent the day studying every page. The maps detailed acres stretching farther than I could see. The contracts confirmed royalties tied to drilling companies waiting for approval. My grandfather had been deliberate, methodical, almost secretive. He hadn't trusted anyone else with it, and now it was mine. By the third day, my phone began buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, messages piling up. My mother asked me to come talk. My father said there were details we should review. My brother's messages were shorter, sharper. He told me to stop being selfish. I ignored them. Instead, I called a lawyer whose name appeared on one of the old documents. He was retired but still reachable. When I explained who I was and what I'd found, there was a long pause. Then his voice steadied. "Your grandfather intended this for you. He made that clear. He said one day you'd need protection from your own family. That's why he buried it." The words sat heavy. Protection from my own family. He had known. When I returned to the city a few days later, the atmosphere at my parents' house had shifted. My brother wasn't laughing anymore. My mother's tone carried no warmth. My father looked at me as if measuring his words before speaking. "We need to discuss the land," my mother said directly, wasting no time on pleasantries. "There's nothing to discuss," I replied. "The deed and rights are mine. Everything is signed." "You can't manage something this big alone," she pressed. "It's complicated. It requires experience." My father nodded in agreement. "We can guide you. Make sure it's handled properly. Together, we could maximize it." My brother stepped forward, frustration bubbling just beneath his skin. "This is ridiculous. You don't even care about land or business. You wouldn't know what to do with any of this. It should go to me." I met his stare. It already didn't. His face darkened, but he didn't argue further. My mother placed a hand on his arm, stopping him from saying more. Her eyes stayed on me, sharp and unblinking. "Think carefully," she said. "You don't want to make mistakes you'll regret." Over the next week, the tension deepened. My parents invited me to dinner, but the conversation circled back to the land every time. My brother tried cornering me privately, first with persuasion, then with anger, then with silence. His girlfriend kept her distance, though I caught her staring at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I didn't bend. I didn't hand over a single paper. The folder stayed with me everywhere I went. I made copies, placed them in a safe, and contacted more lawyers. Every move I made was deliberate because I knew they were watching. By the seventh day, the family gatherings felt like chess matches. Every word was calculated. Every smile was false. And I realized something important. The moment I revealed those documents, the balance of power shifted permanently. They could never see me the same way again. My brother's house stood empty most nights. He stopped boasting about it. He stopped inviting anyone over. The pride he had carried just a week earlier evaporated, replaced with resentment. My parents, once so certain of their control, now tread carefully, their voices steady, but edged with urgency. The calls, the dinners, the attempts at persuasion, all of it built toward the inevitable moment when my family stopped pretending. They had tried kindness, then pressure, then silence. Nothing worked. What they didn't realize was that I had been waiting my entire life for them to underestimate me. It came to a head 2 weeks after Christmas. My mother invited me again, but this time her voice on the phone wasn't soft. It was clipped urgent. We need to finalize everything. Tonight. I knew what that meant. They had run out of patience. I arrived at the house carrying the folder as always. I never left it behind. My brother opened the door, his expression flat, no trace of the smug grin he once wore so easily. Inside, the living room was dark except for the tree lights still hanging on weeks after the holiday. My father stood near the mantel, exactly where he had been when he handed my brother those house keys. My mother sat on the sofa, her posture rigid. "We've been more than patient," my father began. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "This is bigger than you. We need access to those files." "No," I answered. My mother leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "Do you even understand the scope of what you're holding? It could set all of us up for life. If you refuse to share, you'll ruin it." "I've already spoken to lawyers," I said evenly. "The rights are mine. The land is mine. Grandfather made sure of that. I won't be bullied into giving it away." My brother's fist tightened at his side. "You don't deserve it." I met his eyes, without flinching. "Neither do you." Silence hung heavy. My mother's face hardened. My father exhaled slowly, as if weighing the next move. They weren't used to hearing no, especially not from me. The following morning, I filed paperwork transferring oversight of the land into a trust under my name. That single move locked everything down. No one could contest it without unraveling legal documents decades old. My lawyer confirmed it. I had complete control. When the news reached my family, the reactions were immediate. My brother stormed into my apartment uninvited, demanding to see the folder. I stood my ground, folder in hand, watching his temper crack the mask he had always worn. "You think you've won?" he spat. "This family doesn't work like that. They'll never let you keep it." "They don't have a choice," I said, my voice steady. He glared, his face twisted with frustration, then left without another word. The slam of the door shook the walls, but it didn't shake me. By the end of January, the drilling companies contacted me. They had been waiting years for approval. My signature was the only one they needed. I signed. The process began. The cabin, once dismissed as worthless, now sat on the center of negotiations worth millions. The change was immediate. Strangers who once overlooked me now called with offers. Financial advisors, contractors, partners, all wanting a piece. But I didn't rush. I remembered every moment of laughter at my expense, every whisper behind my back, every time my parents looked past me. This wasn't about greed. It was about never being dismissed again. When I told my family about the signing, the silence on the other end of the call was telling. My mother's voice trembled with restrained fury. My father didn't speak at all. My brother hung up without responding. They had lost. And they knew it. February brought the first checks. The numbers were staggering, enough to erase years of doubt in a single envelope. I deposited them without ceremony. My lawyers handled the rest. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't need to. One evening, I drove past my brother's new house. The lights were off. The yard was bare. The once prized gift now looked small, insignificant, a shell compared to the land I held. He stood in the driveway, staring at nothing, the weight of envy written across his posture. I didn't stop. At my parents' house, the atmosphere had shifted. The pride that once fueled them was gone. Conversations turned short, clipped. Invitations stopped coming. I wasn't part of their circle anymore. Not because they pushed me out, but because they no longer knew how to stand above me. By spring, the drilling started. Trucks rolled through the snowmelt, equipment rising against the horizon. The cabin, once forgotten, now overlooked the beating heart of an empire in the making. I stood on the porch and watched as the land transformed, the sound of engines humming like a reminder of what I had uncovered. My family never visited the cabin. They couldn't. It was no longer just a cabin. It was a monument to everything they had overlooked, a reminder that their laughter had been built on assumptions that collapsed in the end. The last time we were all in the same room was Easter. My brother didn't speak a word to me. My father looked aged, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. My mother tried to keep conversation light, but her smiles didn't reach her eyes. When dinner ended, she pulled me aside. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Is there any chance you'd consider sharing? Not everything. Just enough so we can. No, I said, cutting her off. Her lips pressed together. She didn't argue further. She knew it was final. The months rolled forward. The drilling expanded. The checks grew larger. I bought nothing extravagant, made no wild displays. I didn't need to prove anything. The cabin, fixed and restored, became my base. It was mine alone, untouched by their hands. My brother's house, though shiny and new, became a quiet symbol of emptiness. He moved through it like a shadow, never mentioning it again. My parents stopped speaking of him as proudly as before. The golden child's glow had dimmed. And me? I didn't seek revenge. I didn't throw their cruelty back at them. I let the silence speak. Because nothing hurt more than the truth they couldn't escape. The one they had dismissed, mocked, and overlooked was the one who carried the fortune they could never touch.